Here's the other thing that's really interesting. It appears that the first iron that people used were iron meteorites. So you don't have to find iron ore, you just have a big chunk of iron from space that you can now fashion. And there was a famous blade or dagger or something from Egypt that they now realize was made from a meteorite, an iron meteorite. Yeah. So, you could see like a big vibranium meteor, a big mithril meteor, because the other thing that happens is that space itself and the interiors of planets are also producers of new materials. And I've mentioned this on another podcast we did, but it's not unusual for researchers to study a meteorite and find some sort of new stuff. We've never seen it before.
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Hello, my precious.
Goodbye, Tamara. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I'm out of here.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Does It Fly? I'm Tamara Krinsky. I'm here with Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi, a.k.a. Dr. O, and welcome to the show.
Yes, welcome to the show. And the reason why I'm smiling so big and I'm so happy is because Tamara was just creeping me out with her Gollum voice. That's his name, right? Gollum?
That is his name, Gollum, a.k.a. Smeagol.
Smeagol, yes.
Yes. And so by now you have probably guessed that today we are going to be talking about one of the most storied franchises.
Lord of the Rings. And you know what? I've never watched The Lord of the Rings in one sitting from front to back.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, if we're talking about the movies, each movie is like 3 hours long. So that's a lot of your life in one sitting. It's a long time to be sitting on the couch or sitting in the movie theater.
Well, you know what? Now that you mentioned that, I did go to the movie theater for the first one. And no, it wasn't the first one. It was the second one. Mm-hmm. And I was like, didn't that already end? And then there comes some more time. Like, wait, didn't it end? But no, still going. It's like the Energizer Bunny, just goes and goes. But yeah. I loved it.
Yeah, the third age goes on for quite a while. No, this is obviously an amazing franchise created by J.R.R. Tolkien, first in the books, and then Peter Jackson did his series of movies in the early aughts. Fellowship of the Ring came out in 2001, followed by The Two Towers in 2002, and then The Return of the King in 2003. So this massive franchise, obviously, we needed to pick one very specific thing to talk about. Otherwise, we would have a 9-hour podcast. So as y'all know, if this is your first time listening to the show, we pick one gizmo or gadget or conceit from a show or a series, and we break it down. Hakeem will give you the does it fly and the science. I'll talk about it from a story point of view, and then we do a little does it fly for the vibes.
Yeah, and really, for me, this is just an excuse to hang out with Tamara and chat about nerdy stuff, nerdy, geeky stuff. So, hope you guys enjoy joining us today.
Absolutely.
I'm loving it.
Yeah. So, Hakeem, what are we going to be talking about today from
We're going to be talking about a little shirt, as I like, chainmail, mithril. Yes, we're talking about a chainmail shirt made of mithril, and mithril is a metal that is mined in a particular mountain, and it has a really interesting origin story, but its characteristics make it amazing as a form of protection. It's beautiful, so if you're wearing it as a shirt, then, you're looking good. And also, it has an amazing strength to weight ratio. That means that it's incredibly strong for its weight. It's basically impenetrable. You put this thing on, no one can stab you.
Yeah, it's also, and then the crazy thing is usually if you have metal that is that strong, not necessarily super flexible, but the amazing thing about mithril is that it could be shaped. There's actually, so today, again, because this universe is so vast, we're really going to be focusing on how Mithril is used in the 3 movies that Peter Jackson did. But there is a great quote from Gandalf, Ian McKellen's a fantastic wizard character, from the Fellowship of the Ring, where he describes Mithril. So this is how he describes it.
Let's do it.
Mithril, all folks desired it. It could be beaten like copper and polished like glass, and the dwarves could make of it a metal, light and yet harder than tempered steel. Its beauty was like to that of common silver, but the beauty of Mithril did not tarnish or grow dim. So that's the other really important characteristic. It almost has like a light that shines from within, which is very different than a lot of the metals that we know, which rust over time or tarnish over time, like silver, for example.
This episode of Does It Fly is presented by Razer Axon, a free application with incredible digital art to customize your desktop. Immerse in a rich collection of official high-resolution wallpapers from indie artists, popular game franchises, hit movies and TV shows, musicians, AI artists, and more. Feeling creative? Express your concepts via Axon Create to create your own wallpapers and generate matching chroma RGB effects with a few clicks. Visit Razer.com/Axon today to bring your desktop to life. So this excited me. Let me get into the science of this, because this excited me. And the reason why it excited me is because I'm a nerd and I love materials. And again, it's one of those situations where I have to say, okay, the description of this material tells me something about the science of this material, right?
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the first thing that's obvious, well, it's not so obvious. Let me before I go there, let me say a more general statement. Here's the general statement. The properties of a material depend most strongly on 2 things. All right. One is the types of bonds that it forms. So you might remember high school chemistry where they talked about ionic bonds and covalent bonds and metallic bonds. The other characteristic that determines how it behaves has to do with the atomic or molecular structure. If we're talking about a pure metal, typically that's just a single atom. But because there's no mithril on the periodic table, that's not the case with mithril. It must be some sort of alloy, unless.
Can you give an example of like what would be a metal that is like a single, like we're talking like gold,
like iron.
Okay.
Yeah. Zinc. If you look at alloys, you're talking like bronze, right? So copper.
And just to be clear, an alloy, let's define alloy.
Is a mixture of metals. An alloy is a mixture of metals. And there are things that you can do with them, that also, well, the thing that you can do with them, when I say there are things you can do with them, like if you're working something, you're basically, again, manipulating that atomic structure. So let me get into what I mean. So when you look at an atom, right, every element is an atom of a particular sort. The electrons form the cloud on the outside, and on the inside, you have the atomic nucleus. So for metals, they come together in what's called a metallic bond. And metallic bonds are not like the other 2, and that's why metals have these magical properties, right? They're shiny, like mithril is, right? They're ductile and malleable, right? You can work them, you can stretch them out in the wires. And so what is it about them, right? So the bonds are done by the electrons on the outside. And what makes metals different from the other type of bonds is the same thing that makes metals appear shiny and allows them to conduct electricity. All right. And that is that the electrons for a particular atom typically stay with that atom. For a covalent bond is like they share electrons, the different atoms, when I say they. But a metallic bond is very different. When you bring a bunch of metals together, the outermost electrons can just wander throughout the whole darn thing. They're still inside the metal, but they're free.
Huh.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so Here's what's cool about that. If I take a light and I shine it on most materials, the material ignores the light for the most part. It'll absorb it or it'll reflect it, but it'll do so at very specific wavelengths.
Right.
So if it's absorbing a specific wavelength, and reflecting a specific wavelength, it's going to have a specific color. All right? For a metal, they look shiny because their electrons are free. And what makes an electron a difference? There's a big difference in behavior between an electron that's bound from an electron that's free. Light has an energy and a wavelength associated with it. So if I'm shining that light on something that is, wood or whatever, it's going to ignore most of the light. It's only going to interact with the light. It's like the string in a guitar. It is only allowed to have certain wavelengths. So it's only going to interact with light of certain wavelengths. Free electrons inside of a metal, because they're free, they can interact with a wide range of wavelengths of light. And how do they interact? When the light shines on it, it absorbs that light and immediately re-emits it. And because it does it so for all wavelengths, you look at a metal, it almost looks like they're shining, right? And that's because all that light is being re-emitted back toward you. All right. So now the other part of it. When an atom forms, when a substance forms into a bulk form, mm-hmm. a lot of them form what is known as a crystal lattice structure. That means that the atoms arrange themselves in this regular pattern, okay? And that gives it certain properties. And one of the properties is that it depends on the type of atom. So suppose I have silicon, all right? Silicon makes these very rigid lattices. And so if you make a little, if you have like a silicon wafer that you always have in these electronics labs, if you score it with a scribe on one end and then apply a little pressure, it'll make a clean break, right? Straight line. And it does that because the atoms are arranged in a straight line. And so it went between two layers of atoms to do that. And so it has this brittle vulnerability. But metal atoms, but for the metals like mithril and iron, instead of breaking, they actually slide and they do what's called a dislocation, mm-hmm. right? And so that way you can slide it around itself rather than breaking it apart from itself. If you look at which metals are similar to mithril in terms of having strength and shininess that it has, because it's noted, they talk about how shiny and the luster and all. It's platinum and titanium, right? They're both strong and somewhat lightweight, but not that lightweight, So if you want something that's strong and lightweight, mm-hmm. the best thing we have right now is a single layer of carbon atoms known as graphene, super lightweight. And even, other forms of carbon, like carbon fiber, like the, when I was flying rockets and we would fly 16 to 22 telescopes at a time, their optical bench, the tube was made of carbon fiber, and so, I see it all over the place now. There was even this submarine that imploded that should not have been made of it. Here's the question then. So this ore, it seems like it's made of two different materials that complement each other somehow. You have one that is the metal providing the strength, not just the strength, providing the luster, providing the malleability, the workability. But then you have this ability to make it very lightweight and strong, which is like graphene to me. So could it be that the material has a graphene core with the metal atoms around it? Sounds wild, all right? Oh, here's something else I want to say. Another way to strengthen, like that silicon wafer example I told you about, if you add another atom to the silicon, so that instead of having regular space silicon atoms only, and you had other atoms in there, that would make it more difficult to break. They sort of like reinforce each other. So if it's an alloy, which I brought up earlier, then you can get that strength. But now let me talk about how you can make the metal have an internal property that's different from the outside. We see such things occurring all the time in nature in different capacities. For example, if I have one of the things you learn in physics is you have a metal, say it's a conductor, and say, for example, I give it an electric charge. All right. The electric charge is going to reside 100% on the surface of that metal ball, and none of it is going to be on the inside. And that's why a Faraday cage works to protect you, right? That's why they say if you're out in a lightning storm and a power wire falls on your car, don't open the door, right? That metal ball, if it's intact, all the charge is going to be on the outside. But if you let some of that in, if you open the door, now the surface is part of the inside of the car.
I'm totally having flashbacks to picturing Back to the Future right now.
They didn't get out the car at that point. Another thing that happens, which is amazingly lucky for us, is you probably heard of radiometric dating, right? Where you look at, okay, suppose you have some ancient fossilized life form, and you're like, how old is this stuff? It might be, if it's super ancient, it's too old for carbon-14 dating. Mm-hmm. So instead, they use what is known as radiometric dating. So when materials go into the core of the Earth, not the core, but the mantle, and melt and get reformed and form these metamorphic rocks like granite, right? For example, there was this one material called zircons that form these little tiny, I don't know what to call it, grains. They have a particular melting temperature. So they're melted and then they freeze into their grains, okay? So here's what's really lucky about them. When they form their crystal structure, when they go from melted to solid, what happens is if there's any lead that's inside that area, when it forms a crystal, it pushes the lead out of itself. But if there's any uranium, it incorporates the uranium. And why is that lucky? Because when uranium decays radioactively, it decays into lead. So there are two different uranium isotopes that occur that each will radioactively decay into a different lead isotope. So in one little crystal, you have two separate clocks, right? And they must agree. So why is that relevant? Because suppose this material is forming a lattice and it pushes some stuff out, but it incorporates some stuff inside. Something that gives its lightweight and strength on the inside, but yet have the metal coating on the outside.
So what I'm hearing from you is that when it comes to does mithril fly from a science POV, you're thinking, yeah, there's actually a way for this stuff to exist.
Not necessarily. We got to run some simulations to see, but it's getting close because basically graphene is mithril without being shiny, right? It's not shiny.
That's the key element of it. I mean, you got to have the shine for mithril. So
exactly. So you needed it to be shiny on the outside and super strong and lightweight on the inside, right? So if you have a metallic coating on something super strong and lightweight, and this is just one way I can imagine making that happen, then potentially we can get what they have here. So the thing about materials is that there's always something new going on. There's always some new breakthrough with material science, condensed matter physics, and these sort of things. And that's why, we went from giant floppy disks to thumb drives that are a terabyte, right? Because they're finding new ways to do the same old thing. And have we run to the end of that? We're not even close.
No, for sure not.
We're not even close, right? Yeah. So,
I have a lot more faith in our material scientists to continue finding new ways to do things. So
absolutely they will. Yeah, and then half of it's going to happen by accident. Well, not half, but some percentage of it is going to happen by accident, right? They're going to be looking for one thing and discover something else. Mm-hmm. Oh, we're going to try this out as a heart medicine. Wait a minute, what is the side effect we're seeing? This is going to make us a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what's your answer? Does mithril fly?
Heck no, this don't fly. What the hell? They ain't tripping over there in the I'm kidding.
I'm
mithril
so
fly.
Right now.
Since I'm wearing my Simon Cowell t-shirt, I'm gonna have to I pulled a Simon Cowell. So I don't like it. I love it. This doesn't fly, it soars. Yeah, mithril, I can see mithril happening. I can see it being constructed, not
Sure.
being mined.
Not mined. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting that you put it that way because the fact that it is mined is such a big part of the Lord of the Rings story world, right?
Yeah.
You have Lord of the Rings and the books tend to agree on the origin story of Mithril, which is that it was mined. It's a natural resource. It kind of is. There are long, long, long ago. There was more than one place you could get it, but in the era of the Third Age, which is when the movies take place, by then it's become a very, very scarce resource, which is why it is so incredibly valuable.
When I went to see Lord of the Rings, I had no idea what I was in store for. I hadn't read the books, didn't know anything about it, just heard people talking about it. I'm like, okay, I'll check it out. Sounds nerdy. I like it. Did you know what you were getting into? Had you already read when you saw
No,
it?
I had started to read The Hobbit, and honestly, it just wasn't
Yeah.
my jam. I've definitely, as far as like reading stuff goes, I was definitely more on like the sci-fi space adventure train. When it came to fantasy stuff, my fandom was way down deep into Arthurian legends. So like Once and Future King and Mists of Avalon and sort of that whole world. So I wasn't necessarily a Lord of the Rings person until I saw the movies, and that was really my introduction to them as well.
Oh, okay, so for once we're on the same footing.
Yeah. But I mean, I loved it.
Yeah.
For me, like I loved all the magic in it. I loved, all the different themes that it had to say about like friendship and alliances and things like that. I mean, it's such a full world. And Peter Jackson, the director, did such an incredible job. I mean, he created such a complete world. And as you might have figured out from the way I greeted you today, everyone's got their favorite character. I love Gollum so much. Like,
man,
to the extent
so
that
when
it
you
used to
first laid
when
eyes
you-
on him, huh?
I loved his voice and the way that he goes back and forth. And sometimes he is Gollum and he is under the influence of the very bad, bad man, Master. And sometimes he is Smeagol who just wants to do right and trust the Master. And it is fun to coast with you. It is fun to coast with you, Hakeem, because you are my friend. No, Hakeem wants the power. Hakeem wants all the power of the podcast. No, Hakeem is our friend. Hakeem loves us.
Do we have any exorcists in our audience, please? That was
I would go off like that in the kitchen and completely freak out my husband.
You're freaking me. Listen, I found that dude super freaky from the get-go. You're freaking me out. I'm not hanging out with you on Halloween. That's that dude is way like.
Yeah.
Tell me about this. The design. Do you know about the design of Smeagol? Because dude, they were like.
Well, what's amazing about the design of Gollum is that, it's the first time that a character has fully been done where they incorporated a motion capture character with live actors. And originally,
there's a live actor?
Yeah, it's Andy Serkis, who's incredible. And so originally, Andy Serkis was just doing the mocap work, and he wasn't actually going to be sort of incorporated into it. And what they found was having him on set was so incredible that he was then that became what they did. And it was a revolutionary breakthrough in doing that kind of work on screen.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, when we talked about this before, I went and, did a little background research, and I saw the guy who was sort of like for Planet of the Apes, like a ape body mimicker. And he says like, this ape walks like this. And I was just like, but he wasn't in an ape suit. He was just himself a dude. And it was like mind blowing to me because he literally became orangutan, gorilla, and chimpanzee just right in front of you, in terms of his body language and mannerisms. Like,
I will say, like, and this is a pretty common thing in acting classes, but like when I was going through my theater degree at Northwestern, we did whole units on animals where we would go and we would be tasked with like picking an animal and observing them at the zoo and then coming back and incorporating their physicality. And, because if you think about the way that different people walk around. We all have different centers of gravity. We all lead with different parts of our anatomy. Some people, like, seriously, the next time you're out, just like stop for a minute and look around, and who's walking through life kind of with their nose leading. Like, if you look, who's walking through life with their pelvis leading? Who's walking through life, kind of slumped and down? So that
I know
was
who that
one.
is.
So that was one way of.
I'm not gonna put him on blast.
All right, I will leave that between the two of you. You can save that for the comments. But that is definitely one way of accessing different kinds of character and creation of characters. And then, of course, when you get to a fantasy world like Lord of the Rings, where there's so much room for invention there, it's
Right.
pretty incredible. All right, so Mithril story. So the thing about Mithril is we see it a couple of times brought up throughout the trilogy, and even and also in there's the new Amazon series. There's actually a slightly different origin story for Mithril in the Rings of Power. So we're not going to get into that because, again, like, too many different conflicting things. But that said, one of the things that Mithril really helps bring about is this sort of creation of the world. It does a lot of work with world building. So the dwarves are the ones who ultimately became very, very wealthy mining Mithril.
The wealth of Mordor was not in gold or jewels, but Mithril.
And then when Mithril disappeared, obviously people were fighting over it. It was a resource. So when it shows up, it's a very big deal. And, we see it a couple times in Lord of the Rings kind of popping up. So we first learn about it, the backstory. Bilbo gives Frodo the Mithril coat, his chain metal shirt.
Mithril, as light as a feather and as hard as dragon scales.
Which, in a different age, he'd be wearing to a punk rock show. But in this case, he's taking it out into the world. It's going to protect him, and then we ultimately see him attacked, and everybody thinks that he is dead.
He's a goner.
He's gone, but he's not, because he has been saved by the Mithril shirt.
Yes.
So we see that. And then we later again see it play a plot point in Return of the. By the way, you've obviously all figured out by now that we have spoilers in the show. So if you haven't seen Lord of the Rings and don't want any, go watch it and come back.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right.
Back to Mithril. So in Return of the King, which is the third movie in the Peter Jackson trilogy, we see Frodo is attacked by the ginormous spider, which scares me way more than Gollum.
That's the one I saw in the theater. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And as he's, sort of wrapped up in the spider thread, ultimately the orcs find him and they steal the Mithril shirt.
Hands off that shiny shirt. That's mine.
And the interesting thing is that in the books, he actually gets it back later, but in the movies, he doesn't seem to. So we have the Mithril kind of popping up, and then there are other places and ways that it's used. We have our men or humans, we have our hobbits, we have our elves, we have our dwarves. Galadriel, who's one of the elves, had Nenya, the Ring of Power, which was ostensibly made from Mithril. So it pops up there. Sometimes it pops up in old artifacts like helmets. So, the idea that you have this material that everybody, all of these different factions know what it is, it's woven through it. When you're creating such a dense world, as Tolkien did, and then as all of these TV and film creators have, as they've extended this world onto screens, the idea that you have something that's a constant throughout that, I think, is really, really helpful to, as a reader or as a watcher, to kind of like anchor you and lead you through. So I would have to say that for me, Mithril definitely flies, also because I like the idea that there's something magical. I mean, Lord of the Rings is a magical world. And, when you were talking before about the science piece of it and sort of some of these almost opposing characteristics, strength and malleability, the ability to, shine and not tarnish, all of those, the idea that there is this substance in this world that allows for something to have contradictory properties, I go, well, yeah, because it's magic.
Yeah, because it's magic, right? You know,
It's
that's the
magic.
thing about the danger about talking about the science of this when you know
Mhm.
it's magic, right? So that's why I often go to, can it exist in our world?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, when I, talked about the world building, and when I watched the movie, and like I said, I watched the third one first,
Mhm.
what struck me was Gollum, Gandalf, the big eyeball. Sauron, the Eye of Sauron. Yeah,
Yeah.
those three things are what stuck with me. And
So-
I was like, what's that dude in Harry Potter? But anyway.
Wait, so I have a question for you. So
Yeah.
if you could insert yourself into the world of Lord of the Rings, would you want to be a dwarf? Would you want to be an elf? Would you want to be a human? Or would you want to be a wizard?
Oh my. So two of those are way cooler than the rest, right? The elves and wizards to me are,
Okay.
yeah, everybody digs the elves, and you have that pretty countenance and alive elegance. But man, being a wizard, I've always saw myself as a wizard from childhood. I always thought, if I lived in the old days, rather than being out there with a sword fighting LeBron and Shaq, I'd rather be on a mountaintop reading people's fortunes. Bring me money, I'll tell you your future. Let's look at these stars, inform the king of when to go to battle, that kind of thing. But I have to say that dwarves are like super cool to me as far as like their not their entrepreneurial skills, because in Lord of the Rings they're making a lot of money, but they are very crafty. They are creators, and I've always been an admirer of what we today call makers. Whether it's there's making things that are of practical use. They're making things that are just artistic. I admire all of it.
What you just said about, this idea of like dwarves as makers and creators. By the way, I would choose to be an elf, which is probably not surprising. I mean, it's kind of a natural fit. And in fact, actually, when we were at Comic-Con, there was an IMDb boat that had like all kinds of like fun installations and stuff. And they had like a photo op to put yourself into a Lord of the Rings scenario. And so I believe somewhere out there is a picture of me floating around with elf ears. I'll see if I can find it.
Oh man. So all right, producers, here's what you got to do. Dr. Odoff and Tamara Elf. We need to see that.
All right. So does it, oh my God. All right. So does it fly for the vibes? What this is actually making me think about, based on what you were saying, is actually this idea that in so many different franchises, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have makers, you have creators,
Yeah.
and what they are often bringing to the front is a particular kind of rare resource, right?
That's right.
Like here you've got Mithril in Star Trek.
Wait,
you have.
I got two words for you. For you, Tamara.
Yeah.
Wakanda forever.
Vibranium, dude.
Vibranium.
Right. So that's in Marvel. You've got, Dragon Glass and Game of Thrones.
Dragon Glass, yeah.
Star Trek dilithium crystals.
Dilithium crystals. Yep. So this one has, so I guess vibranium is really close because it's a material that you can make all these different things from, right? And like they do with Mithril. Oh, there's also adamantium, which when it's melted, it can be forged. But, once it's solid, you got what you got. But there are so many good guys and bad guys in Marvel with adamantium parts.
So like when you look at all of these things, kind of like looking at the role that these things play in these kinds of franchises, and the idea of having these rare resources that everybody kind of ultimately ends up fighting over, or that get formed into coveted artifacts. Do we think that that's like a good staple in sci-fi and fantasy?
I think that not only is it a good staple, I think that, there's something very human about it, right? Because we label the stages of our of our development as humans by our primary technological material, right? We go from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, and now some would say we're in the Silicon Age, right? And so, what's next? The AI age. So the age of Ultron. I don't know, but
Yeah, that's a whole other age.
that's when you make make a robot from mithril, adamantium, and vibranium, and then put AI inside of him.
That will happen when the world is owned by one big corporation, which we're kind of on the way to. So
we're on the way there. Yeah, we're on the way there. Earth X is what it's going to be called.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But look, if the mithril age, the whole idea of taking, we now have a material that is so dope, it's going to transform society, has already happened over and over. So, when the Assyrians were the first to outfit their army with iron weapons, they basically took over, right? They destroyed it. That's the end of dynastic Egypt, and the similar thing you could say with the Mongolian horse, even though that's not a material.
It's another way of fighting. It's another resource. It's anything that gives you an advantage.
Yeah, it gives you an advantage. And the horse is useful in many different ways other than carrying soldiers. And iron is useful in many other ways than just making swords. You can make plows, right? So here's the other thing that's really interesting. It appears that the first iron that people used were iron meteorites. So you don't have to find iron ore. You just have a big chunk of iron from space that you can now fashion. And there's a famous blade or dagger or something from Egypt that they now realize was made from a meteorite, an iron meteorite. Yeah. So, you could see like a big vibranium meteor, a big mithril meteor, because the other thing that happens is that space itself and the interiors of planets are also producers of new materials. And I've mentioned this on another podcast we did, but it's not unusual for researchers to study a meteorite and find some sort of new stuff. We've never seen it before because the pressures, the temperatures, what it was next to, all of that has an impact on what you get ultimately, right? It's sort of like when you're, you have a refinery, or is that what it's called? When you, a smelter, right? And you're smelting ore, right? And you throw in all the materials in there, flux, you get slag out, but you're trying to purify one thing. And the point is that just in the heat and pressure, cooking occurs, and you change the temperature, you change the pressure, you change the fluxes that are in there, and the enzymes that speed up the reaction kind of thing. You get out something completely new and different. And so if you can find it underground, or if you can make it in a lab, or if you can make it, in your metallurgy class,
I feel like I have to say, like, at this point in the life of the earth and humanity, I think it's really important that we stop finding it in the ground and that we put it together in a lab, or figure out how to make things, because we've been way overdoing the things that we are finding in the ground, and that's a big problem.
We got a plan for that.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Psyche?
Yep.
Yeah, the asteroid Psyche.
Tell our lovely listeners about Psyche.
Psyche is the name of both an asteroid and a NASA space mission going to that asteroid. And that asteroid is estimated to be worth over $1 quintillion. So you go million, billion, trillion, which is 12 zeros, quadrillion, 15 zeros, quintillion, 18 zeros. All right. That's how much in dollars, how much that thing is thought to be worth because of the metals that it possesses, right? So a lot of those noble metals we mentioned, rhodium, palladium, platinum, those things will sink to the interior of your planet, right? They won't be as available on the surface as they may be in the interior of the planet. So what asteroids are chunks of the interiors of protoplanets and other parts of the protoplanet out there. So, if we can grab a hold of one or mine it out there, then we don't have to do it here on Earth. Earth is like the worst planet to mine on because it's the biggest terrestrial body. So that means that the core is the farthest away from the surface on Earth.
Well, I will also say Earth is a really bad planet to mine on because we live here, and when we mine on it, we cause a lot of problems for humans and create conditions that may make it not okay for us to live on it anymore. So I'll approach it from that direction as well.
I hear you. So
I do have to like take a minute to say that if anybody is intrigued by what Akeem was talking about, definitely check out the series For All Mankind, which is an Apple series, where basically it starts with the space race in the 60s and they immediately diverge. It's an alternate history. And the plot line that you're talking about, where there's an external resource. I don't want to give too much of it away, but there's an external resource a couple seasons in that becomes the subject of different competing interests and all the politics and adventure and space race stuff that goes along with it. So I got to give that show a little plug because I love it so much. But I would say, bringing it back around to our story, when we're talking about the idea that so many of these sci-fi and fantasy series all feature things like whether it's mithril or a kyber crystal in Star Wars or, dragon glass, I feel like one of the things that rings true with all of these is that we recognize that as humans. We recognize having a resource that has a special quality. It's just that when you put it into sci-fi or fantasy, that quality is a little extra. So for me, the vibes with that definitely fly. It's a really important part of storytelling. And I love when we get to like go along for that journey and that connective tissue. So for me, it flies.
Yeah, for me, it flies as well. I love that you picked up on that idea of magic materials in different sci-fi, not genres. I always say that every time. Properties, yes. Properties. But you know what? There is a very underappreciated magic material that's around us all day, every day. And if you don't work with it, you don't recognize how magical it is. And that's aluminum. Aluminum is super magical. Go into any physics lab and there's aluminum all over the place. And in terms of foil, in terms of,
Hakeem, when are you going to take me for a lab visit?
I know, that's a good question. We got to be, what? When I come to LA, we can go to JPL together. I got homies all over LA in labs. We can.
I love JPL. I've been to JPL, but I'm always happy to go back. But
Caltech. We can do some. I don't know what's happening at USC.
All right,
and I got some friends that promote college.
Maybe we do a live episode from a lab. That would be really fun.
Ooh, that would be amazing. We should go to one of the ones that, what would be awesome? What I love that many people don't get to experience are observatories with large telescopes. So I think you have the Hale there, right?
I'm actually about to take a trip to Mount Wilson.
Mount Wilson,
to go look at the 60-inch and the 100-inch. So. All right, we're just like getting all off into our travel plans now. We don't want to bore y'all with that. Thank you guys for listening to Does It Fly and going on this Lord of the Rings journey with us. We have new episodes that drop every Friday. And Hakeem, where can they find us?
You can find us at Does It Fly Pod everywhere. I'm talking doesitflypod.com, Does It Fly Pod on TikTok, Does It Fly Pod on Instagram, and I'm Hakeem Oluseyi. She's Tamara Krinsky. We have our own social media, and we post our clips there as well. I don't have TikTok yet, but I'm going to work on it. Before it's outlawed.
We'll get you clocking on that for sure.
Are you on it?
No. No, I'm not. No, there's only so many platforms I can handle. But I do check out the Does It Fly TikTok channel. So I do check out there, and if you guys leave comments there, we will definitely itch back. So.
And here's proof that we listen. So one of the watchers of our show, he reached out to me and dropped in my DMs with a very specific question. He said, "Hey man, I love the new podcast. And I used to watch your science stuff that you used to do somewhere else before. And the one thing I always notice is that you wear these really nice fitting t-shirts. What brands of t-shirts do you wear?"
So what brand of t-shirt do you wear?
Two. So the one I'm wearing right now is one that everybody knows about called True Classic. They fit well, but they run a little smallish, but also they tend to fade their color. So then there's another one called Fresh Clean Threads that I also wear, but it runs a little big, but it maintains its color, but it's more expensive. But then there are t-shirts that my son wears, and I have a story behind it that the Gen Xers are going to appreciate. If y'all remember the dancer Shabba-Doo, who starred in the movie Break-In and all that, right? Shabba-Doo reached out to me back in 2019, right? And he's like, yo, man, I'm a fan of yours. And I'm like, dude, you got to be kidding me. I was a breakdancer in 1980, 81, 82. I'm like, dude, I loved you. You were a hero to my friends and me. And he was like, well, you know what? I got this new clothing company, me and a buddy, and give me your address and I'll have them send you some stuff, right? And they sent me a ton of stuff twice. And then Shabba-Doo passed away shortly thereafter.
Oh, no.
But their brand, it says on the shirt Afro, and it says American from Royal Origins.
You know what that sounds like to me?
A hairstyle?
Precious.
Oh my God.
We'll see you all next show. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Bye.